Welcome to the Frontline Herbalism podcast with your host Nicole Rose from the Railyard Apothecary. This is your place for all things plants and liberation. Let's get started. Hello, welcome back to the Frontline Herbalism podcast. This is part 2 of a workshop that I did called Herbalism and Border Violence. So I give a kind of like longer introduction to the workshop in the last episode. So please have a listen to that before you listen to this one. But just, brief synopsis. It's about herbalism's role in supporting refugees, asylum seekers and people on the move across repressive borders. In introduction to the last episode, I did a little plea for people to become monthly supporters of the Mobile Herbal Clinic Calais. So I will put a link to that in the show notes too. But please have a listen to the first episode first, because it kind of gives the context for this one where I'm diving into more detail about the project and all the things. Okay, thanks for listening. Take care. Bye. All right, so now I'm going to talk about the Mobile Herbal Clinic Calais. It is a collective grassroots project started in 2019. So a number of different herbalists worked in France in various kind of refugee encampments. There was a really huge camp, kind of colloquially called the Jungle, which was absolutely massive, which the French state like completely demolished and evicted, and ever since then people have been living in these like tiny encampments around the city, facing like very consistent, persistent evictions, which I talked about in the introduction to the border regime section. These different herbalists had been working over time, and then there was a decision by a herbalist called Melissa Ronaldson to try and make the clinic a kind of regular thing as its own agency. She used to go out with other projects, other first aid groups, and kind of do herbal medicine like adjacently to them, together with them, but she would be the herbalist and they'd be doing dressings and things. And then a decision was taken to kind of set it up as its own group. And it's kind of been a huge learning process since then, really, in terms of developing our systems, developing our values, developing our training models and our kind of referral systems. Like all of this stuff has been a work in progress. So Melissa and another volunteer who's no longer with us, called Jean-Louis, went out in September 2019 as the kind of like first time as a standalone clinic. And I actually joined in October 2019. So it's kind of the second trip when I was still a student. And I'll talk about the different roles that the project have. I developed this role as the kind of field coordinator. Since October 2019, we've like aspired to go out every month. That's definitely not always been possible. It's very difficult to get people that are available because of responsibilities or other jobs, especially clinical supervisors like GPs and things. It's somehow almost easier to recruit someone that's going to volunteer somewhere for 3 months and then disappear, rather than someone that could come out 1 week a month, if that makes sense. But the first week of the month is when the Red Cross aren't working. So we kind of, for a while, were like one of the only medical groups in the field. And obviously, as you know, what happened in 2020. So, our kind of first winter, like October, November, December, January, we're going out consistently. And then the pandemic hit. And then, I can talk about that in more depth. But we basically were one of the only medical groups still operating. We kind of took the risk as more grassroots volunteers, whereas other charities had to stop. And then we kind of supported people through the pandemic, and then just kind of had like more and more challenges with funding and things, and different people burning out or leaving, like Melissa left, and that was a challenge. And so there's like lots of things have happened, and we're still in a place where we're trying to improve, we're trying to restructure. I'll talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses of this kind of model. But we have consistently recorded how many people we've seen. We don't write people's names down, but we have a kind of tick system where we tick a little box on a clipboard of, okay, we've seen someone with like a foot care issue or a wound issue or a cold, and we'll tick that so that way we can track our numbers. Something I developed, I'm a bit obsessed with spreadsheets and stuff. So yeah, I know with certainty that we've supported more than 10,000 people since October 2019. And yeah, I think I've got a slide somewhere. Okay, no. So we used to be called Herbalists Without Borders Calais, but there was some kind of like bureaucratic dynamics with the American organization who have their own like non-profit model, and it wasn't working for them that we were doing stuff kind of autonomously. So we kind of created our own name, if that makes sense, that people could kind of identify with as well. So this is the clinic. We have used different vehicles. Over here you can see our kind of internal medicine station. So we've got drawers of all different medicines for all different complaints. I'm going to talk about health conditions in a minute. We have a tea urn, which is really popular with kind of hot lemon and ginger, for example. Oh, excuse me. We have a first aid kind of external care station, and you can't see in the picture, but we have 4 or 5 chairs where people can sit down, where we do foot baths, foot cleaning, all sorts of first aid things, skin conditions, stuff like that, bandaging, things like that. And this is basically super versatile. We can just rock up at a kind of on the outskirts of one of the encampments, and people can come along and kind of access care with us. We also, I'll talk about all the other things we do, but ultimately it's like mobile, right? It's a mobile clinic that we can drive around, and that's really important because the sites are constantly changing because of like these relentless police evictions. So our kind of this is us with in Dunkirk, where we luckily were on some concrete, and we've borrowed this like gazebo because it gets very rainy in France. I'm a little bit of a weather charm though. Like the trips I go are always like dry and sunny. It's just absolute fluke. But anyway, okay, so our objective is to deliver first aid and acute medicines, self-care support and preventative medicines, skilled and appropriate triage, referral and hospital advocacy, and herbal medicine support for volunteers from other agencies. So we work as like a team of 4. I'll talk about these 4 roles in a minute, but our focus is really on kind of like acute care. So for example, say someone comes and they're like presenting with acid reflux or something, like we don't have the resources to do like a comprehensive consultation for an hour and analyze their diet and, get blood tests and GI stool samples and, things that you would do in a herbal medicine or functional medicine practice. Like it's really kind of like, what are you experiencing right now and how can we support you, with this constant eye on, have I got it here? No, like this constant eye on, do we need to get you to hospital? So it's kind of not a red herring, but like I think people come and they think, oh, it's really wonderful, you're just giving out herbs or something, like you're just handing out tea. And it's totally not like that. Like it's, if we can spot someone that week who's got a serious issue and get them to hospital, we have done our job. Do you know what I mean? So what we're constantly thinking about is looking for clinical red flags. So for example, we'll triage people quite a lot. Like our main sort of bread and butter is upper respiratory infections, right? Coughs, cold, flu. And we have like a whole kind of algorithm of different questions we'll ask people. And what we're looking for are people that it's not just something they've had for a couple of days, maybe it's something that they've had for a few months, or maybe they've been in the sea, or, we had a guy who had, for example, TB, who could hardly breathe. It was at the beginning of COVID. Everyone thought, oh, it's COVID, and, got his, anyway, I'm going into detail, but basically did his obs and stuff, spoke to the clinical supervisor. She was like, yeah, get him to hospital. So that's what we did. So what we're trying to do is advocate for people to get to hospital. A lot of the guys, like the refugees living in the area, like they don't know the different services that are available. They don't know that it's possible to access La Paz, which is like the free clinic, where you can go if you don't have papers. There's some issues with hospitals and cops, like there are anywhere, but generally like there is kind of healthcare that is quote unquote accessible, but people will experience barriers. For example, they don't know where it is, massive language and translation issues, massive racism from receptionists and healthcare staff. Like the people in La Paz are generally like pretty lovely in the sense of like they're very experienced with refugees. Most of the doctors are like, a couple of them are from Iraq, and they're just like absolute sweethearts and can speak Arabic, so that's super helpful. But when you take people to the emergency hospital, like, you really are dealing with this kind of like systemic racism. But yeah, having like a French white doctor there, like our Dr. Noelle, who's in the picture here bending over, like, she can really advocate to access healthcare for people. So we're always thinking about, who are we missing that is serious? You know, like, someone might present a wound and actually we can assess it, and there's, you know, some necrotic tissue, and we know you need to get to hospital. Whereas someone else can present a wound and it's like, yeah, that's no problem. We can clean it, we can dress it. Someone else will present a wound and it will be like, okay, we can change and dress this for you now, but you need to come back tomorrow. And we give them these wonderful guides that are put together by a group called Refugee Infobus, where they have all of the details about where to access you know, doctors, food, clothing distribution, water, things like this. And it's got all the healthcare agencies there, so we can refer to them. And we also have relationships with other medical groups. So we can say to, for example, No Borders medics that work in Dunkirk, we can say, hey, we saw this guy. Are you okay to do his dressings next week? Because we're not going to be here. Yep, no problem, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, it's a lot of kind of, there's like a whole ecology of relationships going on, which is really important. Yeah, and the other element is we try and support volunteers from other groups. So we'll give them kind of care packs. Sometimes we'll do like one-to-one consultations that are a bit more comprehensive in the evenings with people that are really struggling with burnout, for example. And it's just kind of another small contribution to the kind of solidarity effort in the region. So we have a team of 4, which I'll dive into more detail of those roles. But, you know, as you're listening to this, I'm sure you're passionate about herbalism, but, you know, the best thing about herbalism is this ability to enable kind of self-care, right? And health autonomy. So, you know, if someone has toothache, you know, there's only one dentist that sees people for like 2 hours, like on a Tuesday morning, and there's like a massive waiting list of people to go. But we can give people like clothes, which people are really familiar with. We can give them a mouthwash, like that means they can do it themselves. We can give people wound care kits to take away, you know, with hand cleaner, disinfectant and dressings and things. And it's like, yeah, like that's the nicest thing about herbal medicine, is like it's so building of autonomy. And like I mentioned, we work in this kind of ecology of local healthcare needs. So the Red Cross, Médecins du Monde, FAST, which is the first aid support team, which are kind of from the UK, and they generally are like nurses or paramedics, and they drive around in a car, and they're fantastic. No Borders medics only started a couple of years ago, but they're absolutely wonderful. They maintain like a permanent presence in Dunkirk, and again, like a team of doctors and nurses and things. So we have a really nice relationship with them, where, you know, they don't have enough resources in the sense that maybe they can give someone like a little cup of cough syrup, whereas we can give them a whole bottle of cough syrup, an immune tonic, a chest rub, for example. So we'll often give them things that they can give to people. And this picture here is like one of the old camps in Dunkirk, just to give you a bit of an impression of the terrain. Okay, so how I thought people might be interested in like how we organize the clinic. And these roles have emerged over time, right? So we have a clinical supervisor. So this is someone who's got at least 5 years clinical experience. They might be a very experienced herbalist, like a medical herbalist who's been actively seeing patients, who's done a lot of CPD. Like in the UK, the herbalism is like a bit different to other countries that we have. Like quite a lot of, well, not a lot, we have a handful of like clinical training programs that really are like, you know, like mine was nearly 4,000 hours. There's like university degrees and stuff like that. Like, you know, it's quite like thorough, if that makes sense. But yeah, and we also have doctors in this position. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you have doctors who are also herbalists, which is just like the dream team. But even though we have a supervisor, we try and organize horizontally. So we will all talk to each other about things that people are presenting with, you know, like we'll learn a lot from each other. Like just because a doctor, like Noelle, for example, who comes, that one of the French doctors, she's so wonderful. She'll always be like, oh, hey, Nicole, what do you think about this? And I'm like, hey, have you thought of this? And, likewise, I'm learning so much from her. So it's like a really nice, like collaborative atmosphere. But ultimately, that clinical supervisor does carry a lot of the clinical responsibility. They have to have one eye on the other people at all times and what they're doing to ensure safe practice. They're doing things like keeping on top of research. We'll have a debrief every morning where we talk about, team dynamics, how we're all feeling, stuff like that. But we'll also have like a clinical debrief where it'll be like, hey, this got, there was this presentation and I wasn't sure of it. And you said it was scabies, but I wasn't sure. And the supervisor will kind of, maybe bring up some images or share some papers or something to kind of educate the group. And the field coordinator. So this was my role, which I've happily handed the baton over to other people to do now that I'm looking after my baby. But this is like all the logistics, right? So, booking the travel, like coordinating the medicine making with the medicine making coordinator, who I'll talk about in a minute, who's amazing, doing kind of all the inventory management, the timekeeping, like communicating with agencies. Like generally, I was also the driver. But it meant that I could, even though I wasn't an experienced medical herbalist, even though I was doing my training all the time, I'm there to like make everything happen smoothly. And that role is like so critical. And then we have 2 herbal first aiders. And again, one person can be more than one role. So the field coordinator is generally also a herbal first aider. They defer to the clinical supervisor. They'll kind of, generally we have one person on first aid and 2 people on internal because that's the busier station, but sometimes that changes. For example, I was trained by an amazing herbalist called Dej Lembrandt, who's a nurse and a paramedic and a herbalist and a Chinese TCM practitioner. And she taught me all of this amazing like wound care and dressing stuff. I'm like super grateful for that experience, and we try and pass that on. So on the kind of herbal first aid station, we are doing things like changing dressings and bandaging people, splinting fingers, stuff like this. And then we also have like a non-medical role. So we have a communications and support role, which again, like all of these roles are so important in their own things. So this person is like supporting with translation. And we've experimented with everything under the sun. Like we've had team members who speak Arabic, for example, and it's just been exhausting for them because they default into a translator role and they don't actually get much like medical experience. And we've tried having like additional translators on the team, but then the van only takes 4. And then you can just guarantee if you've got a Farsi translator, suddenly everyone will be speaking Sorani, which is like a type of Kurdish, or Pashto. So then you're just kind of stuck. So what we do now, what we learned from a comrade who organizes in Paris, is we have WhatsApp groups of people who speak different languages. And we literally text them and say, hey, can someone do Sudanese Arabic right now? And whoever's available, wherever they are in the world, can reply and be like, yeah, I'm free. And then we literally put them on speakerphone and then do like simultaneous translation in the moment. This role is really important because what we want to do with every single person we see is make sure they have an information leaflet. They know where to get support. If we give someone a colds and flu pack, we want them to know, hey, if your cough doesn't get better in a week, I want you to go to this hospital. Here it is. Or, if it gets worse, blah, 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 here's other support. And this role can also, just like hoover up other things like cleaning, stock taping, making the teas, stuff like that. They're really like an important role. And also just kind of like tracking who we've seen and what they need. Okay, so some of the kind of health needs and presenting conditions. As you can imagine, people are living outside in like super challenging conditions, right? It's a maritime environment, so it's cold, it's windy, it's by the sea. People are walking like kilometers a day. Like they'll walk from the camps to the port. Sometimes they're walking like 30, 40, 50 kilometers a day. Like I remember doing like a foot bath for someone who'd literally had his child on his shoulders and walked like 30 kilometers that day to try and cross. And obviously people are dealing with chronic stress, like they're not sleeping, they're dealing with police violence, they're dealing with violence like within the camp. Maybe they owe someone money, or like there's so much stuff going on, but it's just so relentless for people. So yeah, upper respiratory conditions are really our kind of like bread and butter, like our forte there. It's like there I feel are like where herbal medicine is like most amazing. So especially in the winter season, we're seeing coughs, colds, flu, and our goal is to help prevent these from getting worse and offering relief and helping identify more serious infections and referring. So when we have an experienced doctor on the team, like they'll often listen to people's chests, for example, and get people to hospital if they're concerned about them. Wound care is kind of like relentless. Like people have a lot of like secondary bacterial or microbial infections in very basic wounds. For example, they might have a blister that becomes quite infected, or they might have insect bites that become infected. They might have musculoskeletal injuries, especially from police violence, from being hit with batons, from spraining their ankle. Sometimes you just sprain their ankle playing football. Like that's like a thing that happens a lot, especially with the Eritrean community. So it's like, yeah, often you're dealing with that. Skin issues, again, chronic stress, people are having issues, especially things like scabies are like really challenging. So we have like a fantastic anti-itch spray, which I can talk about. Foot complaints are really, really common, blisters, fungal infections, things like this. And yeah, digestive issues, anyone experiencing stress or a different diet is going to have digestive issues. So we like to have some of the kind of tools in the toolkit for that. And yeah, and again, it's like everything under the sun. Like 1 week you'll be there and, someone's been shot and you have to respond to that. The next week you'll be there and like literally you're just giving 6 men foot baths because no one's got any other like health needs to talk about. So, one of them sees someone getting a foot bath done and then they're like, oh, hey, could I have one? And I'm like, yeah, let's rock and roll. So we just set everyone up. So yeah, it's really, really varied. Another day you could have 500 people waiting who all have a cough and a cold. Another day, we turned up one time and there'd been like a huge altercation with the cops. There was like people with like head injuries, that we had to get to hospital. There was like all sorts of injuries from this incident and everyone was like hyperadrenalized, like, and just devoured our tea and water like really fast. It's just like, yeah, everything you can think of will kind of come up, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's very kind of clinically varied, if that makes sense. Okay, so some of the herbal medicines used in the clinic. So what I've done is I've just kind of exported the recipe file from my Herbalism and State Violence book that shares the recipes for all of these medicines, so you will know exactly what's in them and how to make them. So we have a wonderful cough syrup, which is made from glycerin, which is an alternative to alcohol because obviously a lot of the patients are Muslim. So we have a glycerin, which is infused with elderflower or elderberry or both, cinnamon, fennel, and yeah, combined with a kind of elecampane decoction, and then like a marshmallow gloop, and it makes a really delicious mucilaginous slightly expectorant, like wonderful mix. We have a fantastic chest rub with different infused oils and essential oils, which is very culturally familiar for people because they'll be like, oh, you have Vicks or whatever. So we'll be like, no, we have this, and they smell it. And, the wintergreen's like a really familiar smell. So people will rub it on them, and, everyone loves a bit of chest rub. Immune tonic. So this is generally a mix of glycerites. We used to include like an antimicrobial vinegar, but I think the vinegar is just a bit too harsh on a lot of people's digestion. But again, vinegar's a good alternative to alcohol tinctures. So our immune tonics generally include things like ginger and thyme, marjoram, lemon balm. Like we try and put a couple of nervines in it as well. We have an amazing like mouthwash and gargles. So this has kind of tinctures of like myrrh and calendula and a little bit of kind of shop bought mouthwash or peppermint infused water, things like that. Like we'll have to check that people are okay with alcohol, but generally because you're spitting it out, most people are happy to. We have breeze ointments, which is like a fantastic mix of like St. John's wort oil, comfrey oil, and arnica. We also use daisy, which are kind of more sustainably harvested here in the UK. We have like an anti-itch spray, which is like, yeah, it doesn't treat scabies, but it helps relieve that like persistent, constant itching. So that's kind of a mix of vinegars. I think it's like nettle and chickweed and plantain. And that's really, really popular because like the difference between having no relief and not being able to sleep is so different to like actually being able to stop itching and for those bites to kind of recover. But obviously if people have scabies, like we'll refer them to other treatments. So sometimes there's like a camper van that comes with a shower unit, and that will enable people to have showers. In Calais, people can go to La Paz, the free clinic, and have a shower there, like if they've been referred with scabies treatment, and they'll have like the lotion and the kind of internal medication. So yeah, we're trying constantly to like not just like to solve people's challenges, if that makes sense. Indigestion lozenges, so these are really delicious mixes of herbal powders and glycerin and rose water. So things like marshmallow, a little bit of licorice and meadowsweet, and they're really fantastic, kind of soothing for acid reflux. We have different creams which are super popular, like amazing calendula cream, anti-itch cream, which is like a chickweed, a really strong antifungal cream, which is like a mixture of tinctures and essential oils and cream. That's really fantastic if someone has like a fungal infection in their foot. And we do, Louise makes, I'll talk about Louise in a minute, a really wonderful chamomile cream. We have an extra strong cough mix just in case people have like a more persistent chest infection. And, you know, often, like I said, we'll refer someone for antibiotics or whatever, but sometimes the people are just kind of in that middle ground. An allergy blend. So a lot of people have kind of allergic reactions. We've decided not to give out antihistamines just because it's not our scope of practice and people are able to buy them if needed. But the allergy blend contains like glycerites and vinegars, so it's like nettle and plantain and stuff, chamomile, aloe vera gel. We combine aloe vera gel with a little bit of Baikal skullcap powder, which is a really strong antimicrobial. We use that in our wound care. If a wound is like, if there's a sort of secondary infection and it's like very dry, we'll use that. If it's very damp, we might just use the powder. We also use aloe vera gel with copious amounts of lavender essential oil in case of burns. And then we have other kind of herbal powders like myrrh. Sometimes we'll use in wounds. We don't like it generally because it's quite dark and the next person who's changing a dressing might not know what it is. Marshmallow powder is really fantastic, especially if there's eye inflammation. We'll put some marshmallow powder in like a tea bag packet and put that on warm and put that on someone's eye, and that will bring out a lot of pus and like really help shift people's eye infections. It's a real it's a real crowd pleaser. Everyone's like, what the hell are you doing? And then they always come back like, wow, my eye's better. Okay, so obviously we use so much medicine, and if we had endless amounts of money, we could do the clinic every single day of the week, but it's just not possible. Even just to run 1 week a month, it's like £2,500 basically on the amount of medicine it costs, you know, to use and to take there. You know, things like packaging is really expensive. But yeah, we have this wonderful human called Louise Wall, who is a herbalist who lives on an organic farm, and yeah, she is incredible. They've allowed kind of a large area to be used to grow herbs. So volunteers come, I think now twice a month to help with the growing. So there's like really amazing, you can see here, this is like a large row of calendula. There's all different beds that people cultivate. And then she's got a kind of lab-based building in a barn where people help make medicine every month. So Louise kind of like takes the weight of coordinating what's needed for the clinic, and then other herbalists will contribute things. So before I had Lee, I was kind of, I was often making like 500 cough syrups a month or something for the project, or other bits and bobs, or things like the lozenges, stuff like that. Unfortunately now the pressure really is on Louise, but yeah, other herbalists do contribute things. We also welcome contributions of, you know, tinctures and stuff like that. I mean, money is like really the most useful thing, but yeah, it's a big logistical game making all of these things. It's been a long process over several years of confirming our recipes, you know, trying to kind of standardize them, because the difficulty in different people contributing medicine is that the quality can be different, right? So yeah, that's a challenge, is trying to constantly create high quality medicine that will be effective in the field. Okay, so just briefly before I talk about Ukraine, I just wanted to talk about like other examples of herbal solidarity. in terms of like the border regime. So one of the groups was called Crop. So yeah, when we meet people in Calais and stuff, like we don't give out like our personal numbers, but we will give out like the Mobile Herbal Clinic number, like if we need to coordinate taking someone to the doctor or something like that. And we had a text through from a group who'd self-organized called Crop, and they were in a kind of detainment center called in a like little Welsh village called Penally, and it's closed down now thanks to their agitation, but people were being housed there at the start of the pandemic. They're still unfortunately being held in another place called Napier Barracks, but this was like a kind of barracks in South Wales. And they just literally text us and were like, hey, like people are getting COVID left, right and centre, like could you get some medicine to us? So I just like, yeah, we made like, I think 100 packs of like cough syrup, immune tonic, and, you know, also some really beautiful infused lavender oil, and, you know, got the labels translated, made a translated information leaflet. I literally just drove up to South Wales, organised with them, you know, got approval to bring it in and stuff. And yeah, that was like a really nice example of like inside outside organising. We've also had that with people that have been put in kind of hotels by the state, who've, you know, requested care packages of things like lavender oil. I'd love to develop like a bigger project like that. And I know some folks are kind of working in that direction. Like I think Calais takes so much energy, finances, resources to make that happen, but I would love to see like herbalists supporting people like refugees and asylum seekers in accommodation, like left, right and centre. Okay, another example is a comrade from Paris came out with us to see what we do, and we gave them some medicine to take back. Unfortunately, I need to follow up with them again, but in Paris, there's a lot of refugees that are living homeless because the French state refuses to house them. And these are people who are having to wait 2-3 years sometimes for asylum applications to be approved. They're people that are applying to actually stay in Paris, but they often have a lot of police violence. It's really horrifying. And they also have conditions like scabies. So this friend who came was like, took a lot of our anti-itch spray and creams and were, you know, doing dressings for people, and that was really helping people get to sleep and just supporting them while they were trying to advocate for other healthcare. There's a few other projects in my Herbalism and State Violence book. One, Herbalista, really incredible community herbalism project, different projects all over Atlanta and also in Ireland. And they've done little care stations at events for people in direct provision, which is like the kind of state organised accommodation in Ireland. There's also a group called Bristol Herbalists Without Borders near me who have been going a long time now, who make medicine consistently and distribute it to kind of refugee projects around the city. So this includes people who like mothers and babies and families, and yeah, some other kind of welcome projects. So that's a nice example of like the borders are everywhere, right? You don't have to go to France, like people are everywhere. And that's, yeah, a really nice example. They also have a big community allotment garden where they grow medicine and things. And finally, I haven't asked her if it was okay to include her in this talk, but a really lovely herbalist called Dana Woodruff, who has a project called Remedios Sin Fronteras, which is like distributing medicines at the US-Mexico border. I don't know the current status of it, but yeah, I've been meaning to touch base. And like I said at the beginning, it would be wonderful to hear of people organising stuff in Mexico or other border hotspots. But yeah, just another little example of things that can happen. Okay, I'm going to move on to Ukraine now. Okay, so as people know, in February 2022, the Russian state decided to kind of re-invade Ukraine in a really intense kind of genocidal invasion. Kind of this is in the context of 350 years of colonialism. I don't have the time to talk about the politics of Ukraine, but really does my head in when kind of leftist types just don't know anything about Ukraine, never met Ukrainian, believe all the Russian propaganda, think just because NATO support Ukraine that somehow Ukrainian people aren't suffering. It really drives me nuts. I'm very fortunate to have Ukrainian friends, and at the time my ex-partner was a Russian refugee, so yeah, I've kind of been in that like Belarusian, Ukrainian, Russian, Polish like side of the world for a long time in the terms of like political context and stuff. So everyone before the invasion like formally began, everyone was talking about like what's going to happen. Like people were already starting to do training and stuff for people's self-defense units, things like that. But yeah, when it started, I spoke to Ukrainian comrades, visited Warsaw, drove around with some amazing humans there to visit different sites to kind of see what the needs were, right? Like we didn't want to dive in without seeing what was needed. And yeah, there was this kind of, it was clear that there wasn't a need for like a strong medical presence, like actual clinics, like other kind of NGO types were like all over that stuff, but people were really dealing with like acute shock and stress. So yeah, I put a global call out for support. Loads of people got in touch. Loads of people donated money, which was amazing. It's completely dried up now, which is upsetting and frustrating. But yeah, I'll talk about the site where we found in a minute, but basically we found a site where we could meet refugees. So yeah, I'll talk about that now. So yeah, basically there was a really lovely little site at a petrol station, self-organized by people, like not the Polish state, just local people organized a site where there was like a medicines tent, there was like SIM cards, there was like a children's tent, there was like a food and drink tent. And it's outside the city of Lublin. And basically all the different border crossings, people on coaches leaving Ukraine would like go via this petrol station. So it was like the perfect place. Like a coach would pull up, 40 people would get off. They'd have 5-10 minutes to like get food. Okay, maybe a bit longer, maybe half an hour, get food, get everything they need. And then they'd be on their way to whichever city in Europe, whether it was Warsaw or Berlin or even sometimes up to like Finland, for example. And it meant that we could be in one little spot and meet hundreds and hundreds of people a day. And yeah, I will just never forget it for the rest of my life. Like people were coming off the buses literally with like no possessions. Some people had literally just escaped like burning buildings like the day before. Some people had been living in bunkers for several days. Some people most of the women had left their husbands and partners behind, had family members killed already because of, where they were being evacuated from. There was lots of people who were disabled being evacuated. There were so many children, and it will never leave me seeing the delight on these children's faces of just finding a new teddy in this children's tent. But yeah, people were just in really serious acute stress and shock, and suddenly being somewhere safe where they could offload. And yeah, I was there with a translator. Some people spoke English, but I was there with a Belarusian friend who's translating. And, there were lots of stories of, people seeing like family members be raped and killed, people's having their apartment buildings be bombed. Like, it's just absolutely horrifying. So anyway, we distributed I was there for the first week and helped distribute over 3,500 medicines. And then a Ukrainian herbalist arrived who kind of took over. And we distributed over 17,000 medicines over 6 months at this site. And then unfortunately, the kind of local people decided to close the site because less people were arriving in such kind of huge numbers, if that makes sense, even though there's like massive internal displacement in Ukraine and people, but a lot of the like solidarity infrastructure got quite institutionalized. Whereas at the beginning, it was always that kind of like informal mutual aid stuff going on. But yeah, so the medicines were designed with Ukrainian comrades, with herbs that are used in kind of Ukraine's like really rich herbal medicine traditions. So it's not like someone in the UK who's going to be like, meh, 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 meh. Like, people love herbal medicine. People have a deep, rich relationship with the land. Like valerian sold out 3 days within the start of the invasion. So like people were coming up to the stand and like bursting into tears from having valerian again. We had skullcap tinctures, we had hawthorn and rose. Like this woman told me this beautiful story of how her and her husband would make rose tincture every year and just, started crying because she'd been separated from him. And like, yeah, it was just all the nervous system support stuff. We also had glycerites like chamomile and lemon balm, hawthorn and rose, because a lot of people were pregnant as well, right? So we couldn't always give them tinctures. We had a tea blend with lime flower, which is really common in Ukraine, chamomile and lemon balm. We also had a nutritive tea blend. So this was like nettle, dandelion leaf, oat straw and raspberry leaf, which is really popular. some people only like external medicine, or they just, they loved all of it. But yeah, we made lavender oil and muscle rub. Some people were just on coaches for like days at a time, so had a lot of like musculoskeletal issues, so they loved that. Cough syrup, again, this was obviously the pandemic still happening, but this was like acute COVID times. And the immune tonic, just to kind of support people during this period of like relentless stress. Ukraine Herbal Solidarity kind of stopped working in the sense that once this site closed, it became very difficult to distribute. Like Lana, who was the person involved, moved to Warsaw and tried to distribute there, and that was like quite challenging, and she had her own stuff going on, and my best friend killed himself in prison, so I just kind of lost the ball. And like, I've written a long article about this in the Herbalism and State Violence book, but it was like very unsustainable to constantly becoming like, I drove to Poland twice from the UK, and it just wasn't sustainable, like financially or practically. But it was really a fantastic response in that kind of instance. And then an amazing human called Oscar has been distributing what was left in our warehouse. Like we just kind of squatted someone else's warehouse with our remaining tinctures. So I'll just read what they wrote. So this October, Railyard Apothecary supported Elliot and a few volunteers from Calais. Sorry, to check the pronunciation of that. Collective is a Ukrainian project in preparing and transporting 3,000 bottles of tinctures and teas for nervous system support to Ukraine. From there, Insight Humanitarian Hub has been distributing them to queer defenders and disabled elders living and working in the front lines. So like there's more details there, but basically we're kind of out of pocket. I paid like £500 for the van hire deposit, and the van got damaged, so lost that, which was like pretty ouchy. And also Elliot's paid for a ton of stuff out of pocket, and then I launched a merchandise fundraiser this month and it just completely flopped, so we're gonna have to start again. But if you can put any money into these projects, we'd appreciate it so much. Okay, so just some closing words about like if you're thinking of doing something similar. There's a whole bunch of stuff about this in the Herbalism and State Violence book, but there is a big difference between short-term response versus like long-term infrastructure, right? Like something like the clinic in Calais is unfortunately going to be there for a really long time. So it needs to be incredibly sustainable and consistent. Whereas this kind of, obviously loads of projects in Ukraine will be as well. Like, the invasion is still raging on, that, there's kind of a huge aftermath if it ever ends. But I just mean like we had a kind of short-term response to that like massive like influx of refugees at the border. Whereas other things are kind of more longer term. I just want to say that medical responsibility is not always easiest in grassroots projects. So like our clinic it wasn't a clinic, right? Our herbal space tent in Poland, like wasn't a clinic. We weren't triaging people or asking them health questions. It was literally like just, gifting people kind of care packages of nervous system support, talking to them about what they'd need and just listening to people. But yeah, any of these projects obviously need structure, care, intention, and commitment. I've written an article about this, so I'm not going to talk about these in any depth now, but the article talks about the importance of like surveying needs, different health needs, like this relationship ecology, like what are your relationships with different kind of groups on the ground. Anti-racism and white saviorism is really important to talk about, like cultural learning, like kind of, what people will take and not take, and things around gender, like all sorts of stuff, like knowing your scope of practice, how do you skill share in your group, how do you grow sustainably, like legal structures, division of labor, logistics, vicarious trauma, translation, social media, risks. There is just like so much to think about, but do not let that stop you, because this work is like super important. And I always say that like I am accountable to those refugees, and I've spoken to like hundreds/thousands of people, and they are all just so grateful that the clinic in Calais, for example, exists, and so lovely and supportive and encouraging. And if you ever doubt that something is not needed, like just talk to people and you will get that feedback that it's really important, and keep going. yeah, and we're always happy to support people as well. Okay, so just to like wrap up on a kind of closing note about like abolition. So yeah, I'm just gonna have a sip of water. Okay, so this is from Gracie and Luke again. Abolition is concerned with presence, the presence of life-sustaining goods, services, and practices of care, as well as absence of violent state practices like detention and deportation. Accordingly, border abolition seeks to dismantle violent borders, but also to cultivate new ways of caring for one another, nurturing forms of collectivity more conducive to human flourishing than the nation-states we currently inhabit. Border abolition is a revolutionary politics situated within wider struggles for economic justice, racial equality, and sustainable ecologies, based on the conviction that there will be no livable futures in which borders between political communities are violently guarded. And yeah, I would definitely check out their book about border abolition. And I just wanted, this was like something I wrote in the Herbalism and State Violence book, but I'll just read it out. Struggles against the border regime include resistance and fights against new developments, such as the British state wanting to deport people to Rwanda. Oh, excuse me. It also includes mutual aid and survival-based solidarity, such as distributing food and things people need, operating search and rescue missions on dangerous seas, organising healthcare, and many other examples. It also means organising as a collective struggle, working with and being led by people on the move who resist repression, organise demonstrations and fight back. We can keep taking action to resist dehumanisation and advocate for free movement of people. All right. So yeah, I know I haven't talked about abolition much, but I just want to say that like these clinics are really important, and herbal medicine is like a beautiful offering and a response to the challenges people are experiencing. But ultimately, we need to be getting to the kind of root causes of this violence, right? Like of the state, of borders, challenging things like these like dehumanizing conditions and, safe passages to apply for asylum and stopping detention centers and, all the other things. And I think herbalists can be, and should be part of that equation and part of that like ecology of resistance. Okay, so some resources. So yeah, I've put in the Calais website, the Herbalism and State Violence book, which talks about all this in more detail. And there's also a link to the resources from the book, which contains much more resources. One last picture from Conversations from Calais. This one just like breaks my heart. You were walking back to your tent holding my hand. We were laughing because you kept slipping in the mud. Suddenly we heard an ambulance siren in the distance. You let go of my hand, ran behind a tree and screamed it was the police. You were 4 years old. Yeah, just again, like a picture of the horror. Like, please check out their Instagram for kind of more of these Conversations from Calais. Yeah, just anyway. Yeah, a couple of podcasts, an interview with another coordinator in the project, Victor, on my Frontline Herbalism podcast. The Calais border broadcast is really nice. It's led by asylum seekers with different interviews, different languages. They read the welcome guides out in different languages. Still We Rise podcast is, again, led by migrants and asylum seekers about kind of more like a UK like experience. Final Straw Radio, it's like an anarchist radio like weekly show that has different interviews, and they have like a bunch of different podcasts over the years of interviews with people organizing against the border regime and the system on the US-Mexico border. Some books. So I mentioned the UK border regime book, which is free to download if you look on the Corporal Watch website. A couple of other books there that I've quoted throughout this talk. Yeah. Okay, and yeah, these are some other groups working in Calais and Dunkirk. So if you're interested in volunteering there's always loads of people that would really welcome your support. So we have a warehouse with mobile refugee support, for example, in Dunkirk, who just are fucking amazing. I cannot say how great they are at giving people like consistently what they're asking for, clothes, shoes, food, things like that. Other first aid groups, other medical groups, the refugee community kitchen, if you can go there and wash up for a week, they will love you. They just feed people every single day, as well as Calais Food Collective that give kind of packs of food that people can cook for themselves. So yeah, and then just like a few, sorry, this section was a bit rushed, but there's like a few campaigns and solidarity projects from different parts of Europe, some kind of health related campaigns here, and the conversations from Calais that I've mentioned. All right, I think that's it. Feel free to email me questions to info@solidarityapothecary.org. I'm so sorry that I didn't get to kind of do this live and talk with people. It's like always the best part of doing workshops is that kind of like participatory stuff. Yeah, thank you for your patience with me. I better return to my baby now. But yeah, I hope this has been interesting, and yeah, please take care. Okay, thanks. Thanks so much for listening to the Frontline Herbalism podcast. You can find the transcript, the links, all the resources from the show at solidarityapothecary.org/podcast.